Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. In this look at how the Brexit media are spinning things this week, I'm actually going to take a look at an article in the Telegraph that isn't technically spinning anything, but by failing to comment on statements it is passing on from another, it is deliberately giving a misleading view to its readers. This article contains a speech that former Brexit Minister David Frost gave in Switzerland in the last week. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So before I get into what the article did say, or a few bits that it did say, I can't go blow by blow, I want to point out what it didn't. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on what it didn't say. So the article basically just put forward the arguments presented by David Frost in this speech. Now, it is usual for media outlets to publish letters or articles entirely written by a politician without comment. You know, politician writes their piece, gets it published in whichever newspaper. You know, Boris Johnson, for example, last week or in the last few days ago, wrote a piece for the Times. Now, this was attacked as being inappropriate because the Prime Minister, head of government, has written something which is sort of publicly available, but only if you pay. The article should have at least been in front of the Times paywall. However, the point is that most media outlets will at some point or other publish what a politician has written for them. You know, it might be the Prime Minister, it might be another minister, it might be the leader of the opposition or the leader of another opposition party that writes a piece, gets it published in the paper and there's no comment. But the thing is, these are opinion pieces and they're stated as opinion pieces. They're not news pieces. So readers will be aware that they're not matters of fact. But the article in the Telegraph was not a publication of what Frost wanted to say. It wasn't just his words. It was not tagged as an opinion piece. It was presented as a news story in the news section where all they did was parrot some choice phrases from his speech without any comment at all. And you know, Peter Jukes, who's of Byline Times, recently said it's not the job of a journalist to report balance, but to report accurately. This sentiment is more widely expressed as if two people are arguing about whether or not it is raining. It is a journalist's job not to present both views, but to look out the window and see which one is right. But this article doesn't even go down the fake balance road that the BBC keeps messing up. They didn't bother to get anyone, expert or otherwise, to provide a counter to Frost's statement, and they didn't do it themselves either. You know, when I've taught about balance in the media in my previous career, I used to teach, it was a science module, it was mostly for how science stories are reported in the news and the things to watch out for in terms of balance, you know, and accuracy. One of the things I would get students to consider is who is the person making the statements. You look in the report, it quotes people. Who are those people? Are they an expert? In this case, you could say, well, Frost might appear to be an expert. After all, he negotiated the withdrawal agreement. However, given that he has spent all his time since saying how bad the deal is, we may wonder if he really is all that expert. So then you look at his past credentials and you go, well, he used to sell whiskey. Okay, but we accept that he knew something about trade, and he didn't just sell whiskey in the UK, so he knew something about international trade, but wasn't necessarily an expert. Then we discover with a bit of research that he was explaining the problems with leaving the single market before Brexit. And then we realise that given what he says about it now, he's probably dishonest as well. And if we cannot be certain that the person being quoted is both an expert and independent, because they're both important, then we ask what the author of the article has done to corroborate the statements being published. In this case, the answer is nothing at all. So it looks like we're going to have to do it. Now, I'm not going to, as I say, go blow by blow. We'll go on forever. But let's pick a couple of key statements coming out, shall we? So the first outstanding lie was the statement that the protocol was always supposed to be temporary. That's the big one. Oh, it wasn't supposed to last forever. Clearly untrue. The backstop was intended to be temporary, though even that had an established, albeit not necessarily straightforward, test of when it should end. It wasn't just, oh, it should end in a couple of years. It should end when these conditions are met. However, David Frost did not negotiate the backstop. That was on the table before he took over the talks. He negotiated the Northern Ireland Protocol, which contains not one word about being temporary, or even words to the same effect. Now, a real journalist, on reporting this statement, should either cite the section in the text of the treaty that backs up the claim, or else point out to readers that no such section actually exists. So, if you want to quote David Frost saying, it was always intended to be temporary, it should be a case of, narrator, there's nothing in the treaty about it being temporary. They also quote Frost describing the Irish sea border as not realistic to last forever. There's several things you could say here, a couple straight away. First, it is realistic. It's resource intensive to maintain, and it's not in our interest to have a trade barrier inside the country, but that was what he negotiated and commended to both the government and the public. The ideal, of course, was not leaving the EU at all, and if we had to, not leaving the customs union single market. But they insisted. If he doesn't like it, he shouldn't have negotiated it, should he? I mean, what sort of moron deliberately negotiates something that they don't actually want? And if it wasn't deliberate, then it meant he didn't understand the implications of his own proposals. Either way, not only should he not have been in charge of the technical talks, but nobody with any intelligence should be seriously regarding anything he says on the subject right now as being at all valid. Second point I could make is that what he's doing here is attacking Brexit. Brexit is not realistic in the long term. That's not realistic. After all, if the rather feeble trade barriers that exist between Britain and Northern Ireland are such a problem, then how much more of a problem are the trade barriers that exist between Britain and France, or the Netherlands, for example? Mind you, it does still take a long time to get from Britain to Northern Ireland. Liverpool, I was looking as I was getting ready to record this, Liverpool to Dublin at the moment, it's over 24 hours. Of course, if we had the systems and staff in place properly, that time would still come down considerably. There you go. Frost then claims that the protocol is creating a poisonous relationship between the UK and the EU. Again, not true. The UK government's refusal to own their own deal means that they have to behave caustically to our neighbours in order to avoid having to admit that they knowingly misled the British public. The other thing that any journalist reporting on any notion of removing the protocol is that by international law, not EU law, World Trade Organization rules. If you have divergent customs areas, you have to have a customs border between them. If you have divergent standards areas or markets, then you have to have a standards border between them. Basically, Brexiteers need to decide what they want. Do they want free trade between Britain and the EU and Northern Ireland, in which case we rejoin the single market? Do they want to remain outside the single market, in which case they accept trade barriers that, by application of international law, this creates? And if their position is that they're totally cool with having the trade barriers with the EU, even though they claim to be free trade advocates, but they don't want trade borders inside their own country, then logically the only thing to do is to change the country, get campaigning for the reunification of Ireland, basically. Any other suggestion is a complete nonsense, and any media outlet that actually wanted to inform its readers or viewers, whatever, would say so. In fact, they'd not only say so, they'd explain why. In what other business can you deliberately mislead your customers and not find yourself in legal hot water? And the article was replete with complete nonsense extracted from Frost's speech without a single word as to the validity of the claims. The article was, and this is why it should have just been an opinion piece. They should have just let David Frost write it and put it in there as an opinion, because all it was like statements. They didn't add any commentary on it at all. But I will just finish off with one other statement reported in this speech, which, if it was stated by a minister of the Crown, would be very serious. And bear in mind, he was until recently a minister of the Crown. Fortunately, he is no longer a minister. He is a man desperate to reclaim relevance after resigning his previous undeserved cabinet position. Presumably, he expected at the time that it would trigger the fall of Johnson and the replacement would give Frost another key position to soothe his overinflated ego. But Frost noted that the first consent vote on the protocol in Stormont would take place in 2024, because the Northern Ireland Assembly gets a say in the protocol, of course. He then said that the government should be prepared to campaign for a no vote and even call fresh Stormont elections ahead of the vote. Now, what is he saying here? Let us consider this. First thing he's saying is that the Westminster government should actively campaign on a Northern Ireland Assembly matter, where the ruling Westminster Party, the Conservative Party, have got no elected members. Secondly, he is calling for the government to run such a campaign, not the Conservative Party, the government. So he's calling for public money, taxpayer money, to be used for a political campaign. This is an unacceptable proposal. It's actually illegal. Now, we do know that the Conservatives do this a lot. They do run campaigns and they use government money for it, and that's illegal. But he's actually explicitly calling for them to break the law here. Third thing, he suggests calling fresh Stormont elections ahead of the vote if necessary. Now, we're having elections this summer for Stormont. So what's the justification for saying there might need to be new ones just 2 years later? Well, the reason is this. The expectation is that Sinn Féin becomes the biggest party after this May's elections. So basically, the sort of parties, and we're mostly talking about the DUP, that have a toxic relationship with the Northern Ireland Protocol that they basically delivered, are likely to lose ground. And therefore, come 2024, it is unlikely that Stormont would vote to say they have no confidence in the protocol. So what Frost is suggesting is calling an election on no other basis than that he and his Tory Brexiteers might not like the Assembly arithmetic that exists ahead of their precious consent vote. Again, the statement was published without comment as to the grave abuse of power that Frost was recommending that the government engage in. And I could go on. The entire speech and the reporting of it without comment, complete mess, and just highlights the reason our society is broken. Because we've got neither politics nor the media acting in the interests of the people. They're acting in alignment with their own narrow interests. But in this circumstances, there's no way a country can function on any practical level, which is why it is not. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.